So goodbye college football regular season and hello college football conference championship weekend. Number 1, Georgia has all but clinched a spot in the college football playoff, but number 3, Alabama, will look to secure its own spot this coming weekend in the 2021 SEC championship game. The Bulldogs are the only undefeated team this season in the conference, while the Crimson Tide sits with a record of 11-1. Their only loss is against the Texas A&M Aggies, while Alabama has held a 6-game winning streak dating back to 2008. Georgia has never made those wins, guys, easy ones for the Crimson Tide. Georgia is coming off a 45-0 beatdown of rival Georgia Tech, while Alabama is coming into Atlanta riding a quadruple overtime Iron Bowl victory at Auburn. So, Ryan, I'll start with you here. Will Alabama upset the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend?
So with Nick Saban, you can never really be sure, right? Because it's so talented of a coach, and he knows what's on the line. They almost lost to Auburn last week. Obviously, they won, so there's not much to talk about there. But if they lost, obviously the season would have been over. But both these quarterbacks are very good. Bryce Young and Stetson Bennett are very, very talented. And then for Alabama, though, Brian Robinson Jr. was a little tweaked up in this last game. So they're going to lean on their other running back, which, he's not bad either for them. I know that he just came back for Alabama, so it'll be exciting to see what Nick Saban does with that. But then for Georgia, George Pickens is back, and he's been one of the best wide receivers for them. I know he was injured for a decent amount of time. He tore his ACL during the spring, but he's back, and I think Stetson Bennett and him are going to be able to hook up a lot during this game. I think the game is actually going to be close because Alabama knows that they need to be better than they were against Auburn, against this Georgia team. So I do seeing it be close, but ultimately, I do think Georgia's going to get it done. I think Georgia just has a better defense. They've been solid all year, obviously undefeated, haven't lost yet. And then this is a team that they're facing in Alabama who literally barely beat Auburn and then got upset by Texas A&M this year. So it really kind of just depends on which Alabama team Saban has out there, but I think Alabama knows what's on the line. They're going to have to show up, but ultimately I think Georgia does get it done. I'll say they win by 3, so Alabama does cover the spread, but I think Georgia does win by 3.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
No, so I'm excited for this game. I do think there's a decent amount of intrigue here just because, and I hate to play this card, but Georgia, we don't necessarily know how they will match up against a team like Bama because they did dodge a lot of the better teams in the SEC this year. Their schedule, when you look at it, it's not very good, their strength of competition. So regardless of that, though, this Georgia defense is awesome. It's historically good defense. We talked about that all year long, and especially going to that Mizzou-Georgia game a couple weeks ago. And the thing I'm most worried about for Alabama is the quarters 1 through 3 last week against Auburn. Bryce Young was under duress immediately. There was a reason there was really no ability to get anything going on offense those first 3 quarters. It's because that Alabama offensive line could not handle the Auburn defensive line. And Saban even mentioned that going into halftime last week that there was no protection. And if the offensive line for Bama is anywhere near that bad, it's going to be even worse for Bryce Young because they're facing a better defensive line in Georgia with multiple NFL-level talents on it. So that's a big worry for me from Bama's standpoint. Another thing, too, is Bama has squeaked out some wins this season against lesser opponents, teams that you're used to seeing them just run away with. I mean, you can look at 2-point win last week against Auburn. They only won by 6 at home against LSU. 2-point win against Florida, which now that same Florida team has fired their coach. And
Mizzou won.
Mizzou beat that team. Did Florida win last week? Is Florida
yeah,
going
they
to
won.
Okay, so they're going to bowl game. Regardless, a lot of squeaky wins for this Bama team, so that worries me as well. If you want to look at history, Bama does have that on their sides. Up until this year, a former Saban assistant had never beaten Saban until Jimbo Fisher did earlier this year. Mm-hmm. I think win number 2 happens this year, that being Kirby Smart, another former Saban assistant. I think it's just going to be too overpowering on both offense and defense for Bama. I think we could see this game be close for three or 4 quarters, but I'm taking a 7 to 10 point victory for Georgia.
All right. First of all, the Roll Tide is going to lose this game, okay? It's Alabama. Not Alabama. Alabama. You got to say it like that. First of all, this is a team that against Auburn for 58 minutes and 25 seconds. Exactly what you said, Ben. They were a mess out there. They looked like a team that had absolutely no clue what the hell was going on out there, okay? On the road, nothing was going right for this Crimson Tide team offensively. I mean, Bryce Young's Heisman Trophy hopes circling the drain. You got Brian Robinson Jr. struggling to move the chains. Defense played well, don't get me wrong. But the offense was actually threatening to score 3 or fewer points in the first time during the Nick Saban era. That's how really bad it was. I watched that game, and it was bad. Yes, we saw Bryce Young rallying the troops at the end of the fourth quarter, or as we expected, to get to overtime. We understand that. But it doesn't change the fact that Auburn exposed a vulnerable Alabama team the week before they play Georgia. That does not help the cause. The real issue here for Alabama is a couple of things. Well, I'm going to just start with this. The offensive line. They gave up 7 sacks and a total of 17 plays for 0 negative yards last weekend against Auburn. I'm not saying Auburn's a scrub team. I'm just saying they ain't a top team. They ain't a top team. So let's get really clear with this here. They're not a top team, and they struggled against Georgia. But I'm going to get into the defense here for Georgia because Georgia is absolutely phenomenal on defense. This is not just good. This is legendary good, okay? It is one thing to have a good defense, right? It's another thing to have the best defense in the nation, okay? And then it is entirely different to have one of the best defenses in recent history. Let's start with the present, shall we? They have given up only 83 points in 12 games. 83 points. That averages out to 6.9 points a game. That is less than a touchdown and an extra point per game. We saw Mizzou only got 6 points against Georgia. We saw that. Historically speaking, Georgia's defense is even better than current statistics would even indicate. Okay? No team in history, has not been better than Alabama since 2011, which they gave up 8.2 points that year, the Crimson Tide. Georgia's only averaging 6 points. They're only giving up 6.9 points a game. So this is insane. They are the best in the SEC in terms of rushing yards. They only give up about 79 rushing yards a game, and they only give up about 151 passing yards a game. So there is no clear path what Alabama should do against this Georgia team because there is no clear weakness that this Georgia team possesses. So then I want to get into the running game. We understand Stetson Ryan, like you said, he's not something that you would say like, whoa, this dude's like a Heisman winner. He's not him. He's efficient, though. He's efficient. He has a really good passer rating. He does great job completing his passes. I think he has actually the best passer rating in the SEC. You can double check that for me. But JT Daniels has been out with an oblique injury and he never regained his starting position. That's fine. Georgia defense has done its job. Then you got the running game here. It's not 1, not 2, 3 good running backs. You got Kenny McIntosh. You got James Cook. You got Zamir White. These dudes, they are phenomenal. All of them are averaging over 5 yards a carry. So when you look at that, and how they can run block as well as anybody else. They've only given up 8 sacks this year. That is ridiculous. Their offensive line deserves credit. We need to give credit where it's due to the running backs, and we need to give credit where it's due for Stetson, who has filled in for JT Daniels and looked very efficient. All in totality, Kirby Smart has done a really good job with this old school philosophy, basically saying that defenses can win championships. So far, he's been right. He has a run game. He has a defense, and he has an average quarterback. So far, he's been right, and I think Georgia is going to take down the Crimson Tide, and Nick Saban's going home.
I do want to say I would be very worried as a Georgia fan if they fall behind, let's say 10-0 even, because then Alabama can really pin their ears back. And not that I don't think Stetson Bennett can do it, but he has not once this season had to play catch up, play from behind like that.
You're right. You're right.
That gives me a little bit of concern, but there's also a very good chance that Georgia scores first and never looks back.
What I'm trying to tell you is this Alabama team, I mean, we're saying Alabama is historically bad and they're 11-1. I mean, that's really hard to say that because when you're 11-1, you're usually a pretty good team. This is Saban. This is bad to Saban.
Is an 11-1 Michigan team. This is their best season in recent memory.
Exactly. They just beat Ohio State.
Yeah, this is their year. So.
Exactly.
And it's
so when you
opposite.
look at this, the reason I'm concerned for Alabama mostly is how they looked last weekend. against Auburn. They look garbage. They look like garbage.
If they go in and just roll Auburn last week in the Iron Bowl on the road, I think it's a completely different kind of mindset
They're going
right
to
now.
get killed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to make my score prediction here. I'm going to say Georgia is going to drop 40 on this Alabama team. It's going to be 40-17.
I'm going 31-21 Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna stick with my 3. I'm actually gonna go, let's say, 45-42. It's crazy, but
Golly.
I'm telling you, man. It's gonna
They've
happen.
they've given up 6 points again. Now all of a sudden that they're going to turn out like that.
It's happening, baby.
Well, it can happen. I'm not saying it won't. All right.